Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week starts a brand new month, and I guess a brand new year if you're watching this in real time. So, of course, that means it's time to get back into our ongoing retrospective about everybody's favorite undead superhero with Spawn, specifically Spawn number 33. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in July of 1995, and holy crap, can we just appreciate how awesome this cover is. Now, obviously, it's been a little while since we've seen the Violator make an appearance in the mainline story of Spawn, but he's back with a vengeance, and this is a fantastic cover by Greg Capullo. I love the action shot with Violator jumping on Spawn, throwing him down into the water, Spawn's chains wrapping up around the Violator's body. Super detailed with the water and all of the walls of the sewer that they're fighting in. This looks so good, and I really appreciate when a lot of artists go the extra mile with a cover, especially when you compare it to the cover of number 32, which wasn't necessarily bad, but it was just a picture of Spawn with like nothing behind him. There was no background, and maybe they were pressed for time, but apparently he wasn't too pressed for time in the month of July, because Greg was able to get this book out with just an astounding covers. Obviously, there's nothing like back in here, but overall, this is a completely fleshed out full page cover, and I think it looks amazing. Story, Todd McFarlane. Art, Greg Capullo, Todd McFarlane. Copy editor and letters, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Steve Oliff and Ollie Optics. A special thanks to Chance Wolfe and Julia Simmons. We can see here at the beginning of the story the skyline of the city as it talks about the rain, which has just stopped, as it starts to zoom in on a storm drain going down into the sewer, where we find that there is someone holding a Spawn doll that they've made, and they're in the process of disemboweling and ripping the doll apart, talking about all the ways they plan on hurting Spawn in the future. As we continue to overhear this mystery, quote-unquote, individual talking about all the ways that he intends to harm Spawn, we see at the end he says that he's going to finish Spawn off by hurting him where it's going to hurt most, and that's in Spawn's heart as he drives a nail through the center of the doll's chest. It then zooms out to show the mystery figure with his face blacked out, but I think it's pretty obvious to everybody watching and reading this book that this is clearly the clown. We've already seen the Violator on the cover, and who else would be this little guy with 3 fingers on each hand and kind of, wild and crazy down in the sewers ripping up a Spawn doll. I don't know why Greg felt the need, like, hey, we better black his face out to try and create some mystery and suspense here. Meanwhile, back in the alleyways, we see that Spawn is essentially holding court in the alleys, talking to all the homeless men, as he's basically saying to them that he believes they may actually be better off and safer if he were to leave. Some of the men are arguing, stating, hey, those guys that tried to kill you were not friends of ours. Now, this is in reference to part of the storyline that's happening during the Blood Feud miniseries, and it's odd that it's brought up this way, because the Blood Feud miniseries, if I remember correctly, was not totally finished in terms of like being published when this issue of Spawn was released. So there's some story elements that are happening here that you may not have had context to when you were originally reading them. Now, if you're interested in getting the context to that, I am doing videos currently on the Blood Feud miniseries. I've already done a video on Blood Feud number 1, and later this month I'm going to be doing a video on Blood Feud number 2. So stay tuned to get the rest of that storyline if you're interested. But there's one man in the back who decides that he doesn't buy into anything that Spawn is talking about, as he literally calls him out and says that's a bunch of crap. This, of course, catches Spawn off guard and angers him as he demands to know exactly what this is about. And as it turns out, the man calling him out is none other than his friend Bobby, who we've seen him bring back to life and also rescue in the previous issue from the clutches of heaven. Bobby states that Spawn is just using protecting these men as an excuse for him to be able to just run away from his problems. He then tells Spawn that things were not exactly easier for us before you got here. We've always been dealing with gang members and psychos and the police giving us crap. And we're basically just spit on by all of society. And if you leave, that's not going to change any of those things for us. Now, Spawn makes the counter argument that, but I've made everything worse. I've brought all these weird freaks and super monsters and villains into the fray, as we see this awesome one-page splash of Spawn in the background with his cape all flared out, and images of past foes. We see here overt kill. I don't know if this is supposed to be Tremor or not. I think it might be. We also then see the Curse, the Redeemer, Tony Twist, Chapel, and Jason Wynn. And Spawn does bring up an interesting point. None of these kinds of people were showing up to the alleyways prior to his arrival. But again, Bobby's argument still is pretty valid that, the guys were having a real tough go of it before he got there. Bobby, however, doesn't buy any of what Spawn's telling him, as he says, you're just full of crap, man. Like, everything that you're telling yourself is just an excuse that you're trying to make so that you can find a way to leave and not have to deal with any of these problems head on. He's like, look, man, I was killed by Chapel. I know how bad things can get. But then he brings up an interesting point as he tells Spawn, Chapel didn't act of his own accord. He was given an order by somebody. And if you can figure out who that somebody is, you can figure out exactly who's behind a lot of the problems that you're dealing with. And if I had the same kind of power that you did, I'd be doing just that. And he then brings up, you can figure out who stole your life and your wife. This, of course, makes Spawn really angry as we see him gritting his teeth. But then there's an awkward silence, and at the end, Spawn realizes that Bobby's 100% right, and he actually thanks him for basically setting him straight and getting him out of his little, pity party mode. However, this interaction is witnessed by someone else that we've never seen before, who quickly darts off into the darkness for not so great reasons, as we're going to find out. Meanwhile, across town in a hospital, this, of course, being another part of the story that happens or gets its beginnings in the Blood Feud miniseries, so stay tuned for that. There are 3 very attractive nurses all fawning over one Twitch Williams, who is very injured in the hospital as he's trying to get better and is being nursed back to health. These injuries, of course, all sustained during the Blood Feud miniseries. Like I said, this is one of the parts where it's like, maybe you should have waited until the entire Blood Feud miniseries had come out to get at this point, or tried to release that miniseries earlier. Maybe. However, they're interrupted when Sam comes in to visit his partner and friend. As the nurses leave, Sam states, man, why are all the nurses when I'm in the hospital a bunch of old broads that are all really fat and look like bulldogs? And Twitch says, I guess I'm just lucky. I also find it hilarious that Twitch is all bandaged up and wearing casts and in the gown and everything, with some teeth missing, obviously, but they're trying to fix him up. But at no point did anyone think to go down to the nearest Revco and get him a new pair of glasses, even just a pair of readers. And that's right, folks. I said Revco. It was the 90s. That was still a thing at the time. With the nurses now gone, Sam decides to make the conversation a little more serious, telling Twitch that he's going to put everything else on the back burner for now and focus entirely on Spawn, and that no one's going to hurt his buddy and get away with it. Twitch responds with a little quip stating, gee, thanks, Grandma. But Sam says, no, man, seriously, I just talked to the doctor, and he said that you're hurt really bad, and that some of the problems that you have are very serious and might be permanent. Twitch states, yeah, I get it, man. I hurt really bad. But I want you to forget about me for the moment. I want you to focus entirely on Chief Banks and keep going down the rabbit hole to see if, in fact, he really is tied to Billy Kincaid and all of those children's murders. And if he is, I want you to bring him down. I'm not going to sit here and, let my injuries get in the way of taking down some guy who was aiding and abetting a literal child murderer. However, at this point, their conversation is interrupted when all of Twitch's children show up to visit their father in the hospital. Sam decides to leave him and the kids to basically have a little bit of a family time together, but he tells Twitch that he's going to be on the case. Also, I should point out, this is actually one of the big key differences between the Spawn animated series and the comic book. In the animated series, Twitch is a bachelor with no children, whereas in the comic book, he's happily married with a whole host of kids. Back to the sewers, we see the man that we saw running away from Spawn in the alleyways, kind of wandering around looking for someone he calls his boss, as he slowly approaches, obviously the clown who's still being shadowed for some reason, and tells him that Spawn is talking about leaving, and, he's very, worried about what's going to happen and not too sure of himself. And then he asks his boss, is there anything you need me to do? Clown tells him, yes, get lost, but come back in a few days because I have a plan and I'm going to need your help in getting it executed. We are then transported to the building that the Angels run their base of operations out of in New York City, as Raphael is observing all of the damage to her office after the battle with Spawn a few days before this. She's being reported to by another Angel who goes by the name of Tiffany, and Tiffany states that repairs are coming along very quickly and that the office should be ready to use again in a few days. Raphael says it better be because she needs to get back to work, and part of her job is going to be to figure out exactly how the Spawn got into her building in the first place and how this attack was allowed to happen. However, Tiffany rebuttals saying, the leader did tell us that Spawn was only acting in the defense of a friend and he believed what he was doing was correct. Raphael, however, says, don't patronize me. And Tiffany responds by saying, I'm not trying to. I'm just trying to put out there that this could have been a lot worse than it actually was. And that, right now, we're not doing too bad. We're rebuilding, and the building from the outside still appears normal to any passerbys. As we get a little blip stating down here that, mankind just sees it as another corporate entity and not their, attentive protectors. And the word protectors is in bold. And this is important to bring up because while, the Angels maybe see themselves as the protectors of Earth, they don't seem to necessarily hold the protection of human life at the utmost highest value. We've seen this before in the way that they'll just snatch people up to turn them into redeemers and essentially, torture them and ruin their lives in the meantime of doing so. So it is kind of a weird juxtaposition for, Tiffany to see them as completely altruistic. But then when you compare it to the actions that they're actually, perpetrating, it doesn't necessarily mesh up. In another part of the city, we see the building that none other than Jason Wynn is operating out of, as he's very angry and kind of lost in his own thoughts, as he's really upset about the fact that Chief Banks is cracking under the pressure. He also has no idea how Spawn was able to get his hands on the files that link Jason Wynn to Chief Banks, as those should have been impossible for him to get his hands on. And now he's also trying to figure out exactly what is going on with Terry Fitzgerald, who he now knows is not Spawn, but he wants to know what's going on, that Terry still has a stink about him, and now that same man is transferring into his office. One of Wynn's subordinates then walks up to him and states, we've run a background check and all of the applications from Fitzgerald are legit. There's nothing to worry about. But Wynn is still pretty wary about it as he welcomes Terry into the office, stating, it's good to see you again, Fitzgerald. Can't wait to start working with you. However, this is mainly just because he wants to keep an eye on Fitzgerald and believes that it's going to be easier to do so with Fitzgerald working underneath him. What Wynn doesn't realize is that this is the exact same plan that Terry Fitzgerald has. He wants to work directly underneath Wynn so that he can keep an eye on Wynn and gain access to files in Wynn's office that he needs to link Wynn to all of the hell that Terry was put through just a few months ago. Back in the alleyways, we see Spawn slowly starting to open his eyes as the mystery man that we saw in the sewers earlier states Al Simmons. However, this throws Spawn into a blind rage, as no one should know what his last name actually is, as he's done a very good and precise job of making sure to never let that information become public to any of the men living in the alleyways. So Spawn lunges forward, grabs the man, and slams him into the ground, stating, "What did you just call me? How do you know who I am?" The man, cowering in fear, states, "I don't. I was contacted by a stranger who told me to find you and tell you three things: Al Simmons, Jason Wynn, and something about Wanda, and that he wants to meet you." Then Spawn says, "Why is that?" And the man states, "I don't know. That's just what I was told to do." Spawn then releases the man and tells him, "Then go find this strange master of yours and tell him he knows exactly where to find me," as we see the man run off into the darkness. Spawn, however, had absolutely no intention of waiting for this mystery stranger, as he then takes the opportunity to climb up the side of the building and follow the cowering man as he goes to report back to his boss, jumping from building top to building top, keeping the man in his sights. As we then see Spawn look down over the sides of one of the buildings as the man darts behind a corner. He then finds his boss as he's about to jump back in the sewer. He sees him actually near the sewer cap in the alleyway. He tells him that he gave Spawn the message and that Spawn responded in the exact way that his boss told him he would, and asks, "What else do you need me to do?" And then his boss, aka the clown, begins to transform in front of him as he states, "Nothing, you've served your purpose," as we then see the Violator's hand bursting through the man's back with his heart being clutched in his fingers, as he just decided to kill this guy now because he doesn't have any use for him anymore, not as if this guy posed a threat to Violator's plans in any ways. It's kind of awful what he did to this poor sap. As Spawn then lands at the entry to the alleyway, he looks up to see the man's heart lying on the ground, and then approaches the man's body, which is still steaming. Spawn then states, "Damn, I only had lost sight of him for a moment. How could he have been killed so quick?" But then he realizes how fresh this kill is, and that the killer must still be nearby. However, before Spawn can investigate further, the manhole cover behind him launches into the air, and the Violator reaches up out of the manhole and grabs Spawn by the foot and yanks him down into the sewer. We then get this big, cool, full-page splash of the Violator confronting Spawn as he gets up out of the water, stating, "Your existence is a farce, and I'm tired of the fact that you don't appreciate the honor of being chosen as a hell spawn, and that, you should absolutely be reveling and doing your best to advance the goals of hell and use this power that you've been gifted as a way of, serving our master." However, Spawn states, "I didn't choose hell. Hell chose me, so I don't give a damn about whatever you think about honor and your plans." I do really like how well this is done. Full background going on right here. Even the previous shot, a lot of full backgrounds, not a whole lot of blank background panels in this issue, which I really appreciate. That's one of my biggest pet peeves in comics, is when the background's just nothing and all it is just characters in front of a solid color. This issue is predominantly fully fleshed out backgrounds, and I gotta say, I commend Greg Capullo for going the extra mile on this one. Violator then tells Spawn that he's a fool and that he better care what he thinks, because whether Spawn likes it or not, he's completely tied into this whole conflict between heaven and hell, and that he's heard Spawn is thinking about skipping town, but if he does that, Violator's going to pay a little visit to the alleyways where all the homeless men live and do the same thing to them that he did to the guy up at the street level. Spawn's chains then lash out of their own accord as a reflex and smack Violator in the face. Spawn demands that Violator stays away from the men. Violator states he will, as long as Spawn stays right here in New York City where he can easily find him, because he wants Spawn to know that one day he's going to come out of the shadows and that he's going to kill Spawn, obliterate him, in fact. And that this will, in fact, prove that no one is as deserving of the title of Spawn as the true citizens of Hell are. Once again, showing that Violator is more so jealous of the fact that Al Simmons has been given the Spawn mantle and not someone like him instead. Also, this is a really cool action shot of Spawn fighting against Violator. We see him down here grabbing Violator with his cape and his chains, wrapping him up, pulling him in, and then grabbing him by the tongue to yank his face into a punch that he throws. This is a really cool sequence, and I very much appreciate the attention to detail that was given in exactly how it played out. Violator then tells Spawn, after all, I'm just as good at killing as you are. Remember how great you are at killing, how much you enjoyed it? This angers Spawn even further as he screams out no. But deep down, he knows that Violator is right. During his time on Earth in the world of the living as Al Simmons, he was an incredibly expert level killer. He invented new ways in snuffing out people's lives. And that skill, along with his anger, is what's currently fueling his costume to act on its own, as we see the chains wrap around Violator's neck and then pick him up out of the water and throw him into the wall. Violator, however, rebounds, comes back and grabs Spawn by the face, and then states, your costume, how did you train it to morph this quickly? It should still be incubating. And this is an important thing to remember because Spawn's costume has only just changed in the previous issue. And there's also a lot of weird story elements about Spawn's costume in the Blood Feud miniseries. Again, stay tuned for more about the Blood Feud miniseries if you want to learn more about that. And Violator's really kind of shocked, and he wants to know who's helping Spawn as he realizes that something's going on here that he's not ready for. We then see a pair of eyes watching from the shadows as this character, who we absolutely don't know who they are, is observing this fight, trying to take everything in. However, the fight becomes so violent as Violator pushes Spawn's head under the water that the two of them don't realize they've actually damaged a nearby water pipe, as the sewers have been neglected for decades by the city, and the pipe suddenly burst open, releasing a tidal wave of sewage that washes the two off of their feet and throws them to the ground underneath the water and rushes them down one of the big pipes of the sewer. As Spawn tumbles around under the water, he learns that despite the fact that he's undead, he still needs oxygen as he breaks through the surface and gasps in a big gulp of air. He then gets to his feet and begins to look around for the Violator, who has disappeared. And while Spawn knows that he's nearby, he's not certain he's going to find him, as we see him standing alone in the sewer with his cape wrapped around him, and see that his power level is now at 6,887. Now, I want to point out that I find it kind of weird that they're introducing this idea that Spawn needs to breathe. And the reason being is because, A, we've seen Spawn survive insane injuries like having his heart ripped out by the Violator, and also having a hole the size of a basketball blown through his chest by the curse. Now, that is relevant because if the curse shot a hole that big through Spawn's chest, it would have also destroyed his lungs. And without his lungs, how is he breathing? Why does he still need to breathe if he's not actually alive? His heart isn't necessary for his survival, so why is oxygen? This is a whole part of the narrative that kind of doesn't really make sense, but now it's canon, I suppose, as we reach the end of the story in this issue. We then get to Image info. It's more of the same, a little rundown of what's going on with Image Comics and upcoming books. Again, as always, nothing really to look at here. We then get to the spawning grounds, the letter section where fans get to write in praises or questions or criticisms to Todd McFarlane, and he may or may not respond to them. Now, there's only one letter in this month's Spawning Grounds that really caught my eye, and that letter comes from a woman by the name of Anita Reynolds from Jasper, Alabama. Now, Anita is a black woman, and that's important because the reason she's writing in is because she began reading Spawn simply for the fact that Spawn, aka Al Simmons, was a black man who was the main character of the book. And comic books featuring black superheroes as the main character in the early and mid-90s were kind of few and far between, so it intrigued her a lot to buy a book that featured a black man as the main character. However, she has a lot of criticisms for Todd, stating that she really feels that he mishandled the way that he portrayed Al and Spawn, or Al slash Spawn, I should say, and the way that he portrays the challenges that Black people in America are facing, and also the way that he portrayed the racism aspect that we saw when Spawn fought against the Klan, and that she's like, I've grown up my whole life in Alabama. She's like, I'm not saying there's no racist here, but there's racist all over the country. And while I know the Klan still exist, I've never seen them just riding around in pickup trucks in droves, just hunting people down. And she feels that Todd was also almost kind of trivializing some of the real world problems that Black Americans face, which is one of the things I talked about in my commentary on that issue, was that you have to be really careful when you address a real sociological problem like that, in that you don't want it to make it so cartoony that it becomes unrealistic or trivializes the reality of what it is. And this woman seems to believe that Todd kind of failed in that aspect. And she's going to continue to buy the book because she, again, wants to support the idea of a Black superhero being the main character of a book, but she wants Todd to do a better job going forward of trying to better represent the realisms of the problems that Black people face, and also the realisms of their culture as well. And it's an interesting criticism. She's not mean in any way about the way that she brings it up. She's really just trying to, tell Todd, like, hey, I get what you're trying to do. You're doing it wrong. You need to change. And it's important to note this because this is a challenge and possible pitfall anytime someone tries to write a story about a racial or ethnic group that they are not part of. Obviously, Al Simmons was a Black American who grew up in America, but Todd McFarlane is a white Canadian who grew up in Canada. So he doesn't actually understand what it is to be a Black man who grows up and lives in America, and he never can because he's not that. And yes, he can still write a story about a character in that way, but he needs to make a point to try and make sure that the stories he's writing are accurately representing what this character is and are not just based on what the media version of that character should be is. And I'll be the first to admit, it's a really difficult, fine line to walk to do this. And like I said, I feel like there's parts where Todd does okay with it, and then there's other parts where he doesn't. And this is also at a point in time when it's difficult to get that kind of insight into a culture you're not part of, because this is just look up a YouTube video or just type in something and go to an internet forum that's readily available all over the place. I mean, Todd probably had the internet in 95, but internet in 95 sucked and dial-up was terrible and there was no streaming video. Like, his ability to gain access to that kind of information was severely hampered by the technology of the time. And whether or not he actually was able to talk to Black people around him to get an actual understanding of what their lives were like, maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but he's struggling to try and accurately convey what he wants to in the story, and is unfortunately kind of relying too much on television and movies to kind of fill in the blanks. And in this woman's opinion, Anita's opinion, that's not really the right way to go about it. And to some extent, I see your point. I agree with it. And again, this is really where you are going to run into some very difficult challenges when you try to write a story like this. We then get some pinups from some other artists. This one by Mark Pennington of Spawn fighting a caveman. I don't know who this caveman is. If you do, let me know in the comments section, because I'd like to know who this caveman is supposed to be. Maybe he's not anybody, but it seems like if he's featured this prominently fighting against Spawn, he is probably somebody. And then this pinup by one less white of Spawn just standing with his hands aglow with necro energy. Both of these look actually pretty cool, and I really am glad that both of them got included in the book. We then get a 2-page ad/rundown of the newly named McFarlane toys. That's right, Todd has finally changed the Todd Toys brand into the McFarlane Toys brand that we know and love today. He also features some of the new figures that are going to be coming out of Cosmic Angela, Shaft, and Dane from Wetworks. He kind of gives a little bit of a rundown of explaining what's going on with the company, though he states that the name change will not be discussed until next month's issue. But it's a cool little blurb about what's upcoming with Todd Toys and what people can expect from the company going forward. We then get an advertisement for DEF CON 2, which happened in September of 1995. If you were there and have any stories you'd like to tell about it, please feel free to talk about it in the comments below, because I'd like to hear. Then we get an advertisement for WildStar. If you'd like to know more about WildStar, feel free to check out my WildStar playlist. We then get an advertisement for Inquest, which is talking about a Spawn collectible card game that I have never seen, ever. I would love to get my hands on these. Not that I've ever been someone who was really into collectible card games, but it seems like a really cool little piece of Spawn memorabilia that I can't imagine would be that expensive to get my hands on. But then again, I could be totally wrong. But I'd love to have a set of these just to have them. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Spawn Blood Feud. As I stated before, I already have a video on Spawn Blood Feud number 1 that I posted last month. And if you stay tuned, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be posting a video on Spawn Blood Feud number 2. And that was Spawn number 33. Overall, I thought this was a fantastic book. I thought it did a very good job of integrating the story elements of Blood Feud into the mainline series, even though the Blood Feud miniseries wasn't actually totally done, I don't think, when this book was first published. Also, the artwork throughout the book was awesome. I really liked the way that it tied in ancillary characters to show what they were dealing with and what problems were going on for them and how Spawn's interactions with other people were affecting their lives. I also liked the way that they brought the Violator back into the fold and gave a very solid explanation as to why Spawn is now essentially trapped in New York City because Violator is going to kill all of the homeless men in the alleyways if he decides to leave. And then also, I really appreciate the point that Violator brings up the change in Spawn's costume and how that's something that Spawns can do, but that Al should not have been able to do at this point, which is an interesting plot point to reveal. But then again, these are all just my opinions. Your opinions may be completely different. You might have hated the way that this book was laid out, and you might have thought the artwork was terrible, though I don't know how you would. But if so, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.